Today, and thank
Right.
you for joining me today. I'm here with you, Rita Smith, an international expert for violence against women and violence in general, actually. And my name is Melissa Faith Hart, the CEO and founder of eBodyGuard. And I'm going to have a conversation with you like we normally have. We've had many conversations through the years. And I'm going to ask you a few questions, and we're going to then share it with our audience. And this is going to just be a normal discussion with you and I, if that's okay with you. But I want to ask you, what started your journey to be a victim advocate? Why did you go into this? And why not become a psychologist or work in a hospital to help and support people? Where'd you go with this?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because initially, when I first started on my my higher education path, I had a pretty complex plan that I'd worked out with my cousin. She was going to do speech therapy, and I was going to work with emotionally disturbed kids. So it was, we were going to have a clinic together.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was kind of what I thought going into my first year of my associate degree. So I got a 2-year degree from a community college in majoring in psychology, and then did the 4-year bachelor degree completion at Michigan State. So it was a psychology. It was a Bachelor of Science with psychology as my major. And I thought I was going to work with kids. In the first probably year and a half that I had a job associated to my degree, I was working at a residential and school campus with kids who were considered emotionally disturbed. And when I left that job in 1981, looking for another position, I answered an ad in a newspaper for counselor, because that's how you found a job in 1981. You read newspaper ads, and so this ad asked for a counselor, and I said, I'm one of those. So I got an interview. I get to this place, this location, and I go into the group interview with these women, and they asked me what I knew about battered women. I was like, what? Because I had a bachelor's degree. Yeah, I had a bachelor's degree in psychology. I had never heard the term. That's how little information we had at that point. Wow. It just wasn't common language, wasn't common knowledge. I answered the question.
This was 1981.
1981,
okay.
Right. 1981.
Interesting time.
Yeah. It was just the very beginning of what the battered women's movement was. And so I answered those questions. I did a second interview. They hired me as a weekend crisis counselor. And I began my journey there in this field. And I think the reason I stayed, Melissa, was because as I was learning from the survivors and their children about what they were experiencing, I got this aha moment. It's like, oh, it's no wonder the kids are not doing well. They don't feel safe at home. Well, of course they're not doing well. Of course they're not adjusting, because they don't know if they're safe, if their mom is safe. And so it was like, we have to get the adults safe for the kids to be safe. And then they won't need the kind of facility that I'd worked at previously. And so it was like, we go further up the river to save people from falling in, that Gloria Steinem quote, where, you can pull women out of the river forever, or you can go upriver or upstream and try to figure out why they're falling in.
Yeah.
So it was like, we can work with the kids, and we can figure out why they're not doing well, why they're having these kinds of inappropriate responses to their lives. And so I fell in love with the people who, in spite of everything, shouldn't be able to get up in the morning, shouldn't be able to function, who were doing it in spite of everything, in spite of someone who was intent on them not succeeding, and found I was good at it, and that it was making a difference, and I never left.
Yeah. And so of those women and other survivors and the work, can you share with me a couple of stories and our viewers, some of just two maybe or three stories that of women that you've held in your heart that have maybe never left you?
Mhm. There's so many of those women who early on educated me.
Okay.
I'm an expert because of the gift of their trust. So one of the first clarity moments I had was um, understanding exactly how controlling an abuser can be in so subtle ways, but terrifying ways, right? Like I said, I was a weekend crisis counselor. I was there one night, and a woman had come back after dark. She'd been out taking care of business or doing something. I let her in, and she said, Rita, I want to show you something. I want to show you something. She was so excited. She had really long, beautiful hair. And I said, what is it? And she had this little paper bag, little teeny paper bag. She opened it up, and it was a beautiful barrette for her hair. It cost like $1.79 or something. She showed me the receipt, and she says, I don't have to explain this to anybody.
Oh.
She was able to buy something that made her feel good about herself, that she didn't have to explain or excuse to someone who would have given her a load of crap, maybe hurt her because she didn't ask his permission, or she was trying to look too pretty, or there were so many things that rolled off of that for me that I had been told by women. That was like, I made this connection. It was like, oh my God. The intense scrutiny of every move you make, every dime you spend, every place you go becomes a way of controlling you and terrifying you. And so that moment happened probably in 81. And it never left me, because it was like, oh, I get it now. I get what you're saying. So that was really helpful to me, for her to just, tell me that, share that information with me. And then for me to be smart enough to make the connection. Oh, well, that's what it means. Got it now. I can help other people understand why just leaving is a really dangerous thing for you to say to a woman who's in, why don't you just leave? That whole comment, that makes me crazy. And then, there was another woman that I worked with.
Can you go into that further, actually?
Uh-huh.
For the world, because so there's a disconnect in that, right?
Mm.
People that are not in an abusive scenario don't understand, because to them, that's logic.
Right.
Okay. Break it down. Make it simple for the world to understand.
Okay. So why doesn't she just leave is a comment that is uninformed and dangerous. Right. The reason it's uninformed is because almost certainly she would have gotten the message multiple times from the abuser that if she left, her life was in danger. She might die. Her friends might die. Her family might die. She would never see her kids again. All kinds of actual physical violence threats around, if you try to leave me, this will happen. So very dangerous. So a target is on her back if she walks out that door, literally or emotionally or spiritually. So walking out the door is an act of bravery.
And there's almost so many entanglements by the time that she's been in the relationship, maybe that many years, that untangling it is, in her mind, maybe a road. She's already rung the bell. She's already rung so many bells that just to unentangle it is impossible in her mind, right?
Well, and it's not in her control to untangle it. That's the other piece of this, is
She
that
doesn't feel like she has the power to do it.
Well, she doesn't have the power to do it, because if she walks out the door, tactics and behaviors the abuser will engage in to ensure that she fails at that attempt to leave will occur. So stalking, harassing her at work so that she loses her job, finding her no matter where she is, and creating problems so that she loses her lease. Walking away doesn't mean the violence stops. That's what people need to understand.
Doesn't it get worse?
It can, in fact, escalate to homicide.
Mhm.
because that's a threat that almost every woman I ever worked with was made, the threat of lethal violence. Not every woman is murdered who leaves, but every woman is a potential homicide victim because she leaves. And that's why we need to stop making it seem like it's just a simple decision. She's not in control of what he's going to do when she walks away. He's going to escalate. He's going to continue to track her, to try to win her back, to never leave her alone, to find her wherever she goes, to track her digitally. So walking away isn't a guarantee that she's going to be free of the violence, because she's not the one committing the violence. She can't control whether he stops or not.
In fact, in the digital world, talk about that. We've got even another angle of how he can manipulate her, get a hold of her, correct?
Well, it's initially started with the actual online physical unit that she used, whether it was the laptop or the phone, the keystroking, kind of malware that gets downloaded, GPS tracking systems. But there's now actual physical things that can track people, like the Apple tags, and things put on cars to find out where she goes constantly. So there's this cyber world now. It's not just the physical world you have to hide from your abuser from. You have to hide in the cyber world too, which means you have to scrub your social media. You have to find, have to get yourself enrolled in a address confidentiality program to make sure your physical address isn't found. There's all kinds of steps that a victim would have to take to reduce the possibility that the abuser will find her. And that's not a guarantee, because some of them are very, very committed to either securing or controlling her to the point of death. So when you say, why doesn't she just walk away? It's because she's not in control of the violence, and she can't stop that person. She can only take steps that might reduce the possibility that she would be a victim again.
Thank you so much for actually walking us through that. So many people, and fortunately for them, they are never going to be in this circumstance.
Right.
Right. So the lack of empathy is because they don't have to deal with that. And that's great. But being able to discuss this down to the, baseline level of walking that through gives the world a whole lot more, at least, compassion for what a woman and their children are experiencing when they have to take that level of bravery. It's beyond bravery, right? It's truly risking their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for doing that for us. So your journey, let's get back to you. So your journey, in order to be able to empower survivors, in order to be able to represent sometimes their voice, because learning from them, like you always say to me, I love when you say that, learning from them, having them teach you throughout the years, and it's been a lot of years, 43,
Yeah.
Has brought you to partnerships with the domesticshelters.org, National Domestic Violence Hotline, the NFL, and I would say eBodyGuard now. And so tell us about your journey and how it brought you to working at the NFL. How did that story happen?
Well, that story happened because somewhere along the way, after I had been working in the field for a while, and I was the director of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence at the time, we as advocates were really clear that women were never going to stop this violence by ourselves. We could build shelters on every corner, and unless good men who do not commit this violence stood up and changed the culture, we would just keep providing services for victims. So we needed someone to say, this is not acceptable behavior. You don't treat people you care about this way. It's not okay. So we needed good men who don't engage in this to join us in the effort to say, not acceptable, stop it. Because men listen to men more than they listen to women.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a reality. And so I started thinking about who can influence men. And
Smart.
what I figured was the NFL was probably the biggest platform who could influence young men and adults. So so I contacted them in 1998, wrote a letter, and asked if we could have a conversation. And somebody from the NFL headquarters was coming out to a game that the Broncos were playing in Denver, and he met with a board member and I. And my conversation with him was not about you're all bad and you need to stop. It was, all we ever hear about are the bad actors in the league, the players who behave badly, the players who hurt people, the players who drive drunk. That's not most of the people in your NFL family. How about if we talk about these guys, the good guys, the men who are good community members and who are good family members and who have foundations? Those guys, let's have those guys talk about what it means to be a man. Let's reflect on what a man, a good man, a strong man does. And he listened. He was kind to have a conversation, but they couldn't figure it out at that point. 1990, they didn't know.
When was that? What year was that again?
98.
Okay. Oh,
1998.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that wasn't that long ago. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So, and this was right after several fairly high profile, or right around the same time, fairly high profile murders committed by current or former NFL players. So I think that's why they even engaged in a conversation.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So they were willing to at least listen based on the fact that they'd had some fairly high profile news stories. And so every time something else came up that was reflective of, we can change this together, I would reach out to them.
Yeah.
And then in 2012, in the fall of 2012, Jovan Belcher murdered Cassandra Perkins and went to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City and killed himself. He was a Kansas City Chiefs player, and he killed himself in front of a couple of his coaches. So murder-suicide on the property of the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's when I contacted Don McPherson, who is a former NFL quarterback, really good man, doing anti-violence work. So I'd met him in my journey to try to find good men to help carry the message. Don was one of those good men. And I asked Don if he would co-write a letter to Roger Goodell with me. And we did in late 2012. And
wait, whoa, we went from 1998 to 2012.
Yeah, a series of me attempting to get
Talk
their
about patience.
One of the strongest, in my opinion, skills an advocate has is persistence.
Yes.
You just keep working towards the goal you know is helpful, right?
Yes.
And so we were invited in February of 2013, Don and I, to have a conversation at NFL headquarters with someone. So we met with a couple people about that murder-suicide. We talked about what strategies the NFL could engage in. I started working with someone on the player engagement team to help them get information about what local resources were available to them. So in every NFL city, the domestic violence and sexual assault programs there, I got information so they could internally start to share. If this issue comes up in your city, these are the community advocates you can reach out to get support, to get information, to provide services for people that you know on your team, in your association might need. So that was what I did from like February 2013 to July of 2014. I was working internally with the NFL to help them understand how they could get information and resources to their internal family. So it was just internal at that point. I left the National Coalition in July of 2014. And in August of 2014, TMZ released more of the Ray Rice assault that had not been released previously. So the initial release in February or something was just a small clip of what had happened with that assault. In August, they released the interior of the elevator where they show him actually hitting her with a fist and knocking her unconscious.
Oh, wow.
That was not information that people had seen prior. And so that, because the NFL had given him a 2-game suspension based on what they had previously seen and what Ray had told them, this fairly vicious attack and the visual of her being knocked unconscious and dropping to the floor, people just rose up and, oh my God, what are you, 2 games? Come on, NFL. So they got hammered pretty hard.
Got it. The NFL did.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's when the commissioner decided to go full bore response. And they instituted a whole lot of different strategies. They interviewed a number of different experts in the field because they knew who I was at the time. I'd been poking at them since '98, and I'd been working with them internally. And now I was not associated with anyone. I was one of the people that they interviewed as an advisor for them. And so I became one of the 5 people they hired in September of 2014 to advise them and help them develop policy strategies and responses to these issues, domestic violence and sexual assault within the NFL family and teams.
Wow, fantastic. And what kind of progress have you seen because of the involvement of bringing in domestic violence experts like yourself to engage with the players?
Well, I think that that what we have seen is institutionally important and critical because there were some real changes to how they responded. So the previous way that all sports leagues had dealt with this is they would wait for the criminal justice system to make a decision. If there was arrest, if there was a conviction, then they did something.
Okay.
If there was no arrest or no conviction, they just ignored it and the team went about their way and the player never had consequences for anything. And so we were really clear with the commissioner at the NFL that you cannot use the criminal justice system as your standard for what's true and what's not.
It's a reactive situation, right?
And it's not ever going to meet the need because domestic violence and sexual assault are probably 2 of the most underreported crimes in the country.
Right.
So they rarely ever get to the criminal justice stage. And then the convictions on either of those cases is even rarer.
Yeah.
So you can't use that standard because the criminal justice system itself doesn't do a good job of responding to these issues. It doesn't actually respond well and treat victims with integrity and support. And so that can't be your standard. And so as we were talking, what they decided to do, one of the first things they did based on our advice as advisors was to move their response under the personal conduct policy. They have a personal conduct policy that everybody who's associated with the NFL has to sign. I signed one when I became an advisor. If I did anything that would tarnish the shield, that would reflect badly on the league, I could be fired. I could be let go. And so what they did was they took any of these kinds of behaviors and put them under the personal conduct policy, and that's how they would be judged. So whether or not they were convicted, whether or not they were arrested, if the NFL did an internal investigation and found that something negative or bad had happened and that it looked bad or it was not appropriate, it was not conduct they thought reflected well on the league, there could be suspension, fines made. And so it became a way for more action to be taken and a standard to be set that was different than, well, he wasn't arrested, so what can we do? Which is what they had done in the past and what all sports leagues had done. They just ignored it if it didn't end in them being in jail. And so that became a better way for us to, number one, hold the abuser accountable for their actions. And number two, then provide resources and information for both the victim and the perpetrator to have better outcomes. So supporting the victim and getting them services, and then helping the perpetrator find connections to ways in which they don't engage in that behavior in the future.
Wow,
So,
sounds wonderful, and a balanced way to get to some level of civility, and really a great way forward.
I think that it's made a difference. It's a process. It's taken a while to get to this place, but
Yeah.
but now those allegations are being investigated. The person who does this investigation is a former special victims prosecutor out of the Manhattan DA's office. So very skilled. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to understand the violence. She knows how to talk to victims. And so they do a very good investigation. They figure it out, and then they determine what kind of consequence will be given to the player or the employee who's been accused. And we have had outcomes on this from really high profile players to owners. And
Great.
we've had 2 different owners who've been fined multi-million dollars for behaving badly and acting badly. And so anybody gets held accountable under this policy. It's not a free ride for anyone, because they might be the best quarterback or they might own the team. If they have behaved badly and violated the personal conduct policy, then there are consequences at this point.
Well, it sounds like the NFL owes you a great deal of thanks, and our world does, because this personal conduct policy really does meet in the middle, and I appreciate the work you've done here. So thank
Thanks.
you. Great job. So I'm going to move forward into the discussions that you and I have about the ratification or lack of ratification, actually, of the Geneva policy. And I love when I'll pick up the phone, you pick up the phone with me, and then you'll go, "Oh, Melissa, that goes all the way back to 19." Now, so why don't you tell me about it so that the world can know about it? Why did we not ratify that? What was going on back in the 1980s? Talk to me about that, because really the equality of getting us where we need to be as females here in America, right? What's going on from a female being able to be paid across the board? And then I'm going to move forward into other, tertiary, secondary and tertiary aspects of this. But what was going on in the 80s?
Well, I think you have to look at what the history of the view of women has been as humankind, right? So, and for a very long time of our existence as human beings, women and children were seen as property.
Okay.
And so they were the property of the male. So if she got married to him, and this was in most countries in the world, there was either a dowry or the father had to be paid some kind of something, money or product, to buy her. So it was an actual transaction for women for most of our history as human beings. And so we stopped doing that in most civilizations or societies.
Like, what year did we stop doing that?
Yeah, I don't know that part about it, because some still do it. I think some still have dowries.
Let's talk about that. So is this a primal, innate thing in a man? Like, does he like let's just be honest about it. Like, me, I'm a single female. Am I looked at, do you think, as property? Like, let's just have the discussion.
Well, I think it depends on who we're talking to. There are some people who still believe that, even
that I should probably married, right?
Right, that we would be property. We would need to be submissive. The head of the household would be male, and you would make decisions. And that's, people can find scriptural support for that. In almost every religious entity, there's some kind of scriptural support for men being in charge. And that's mostly because men wrote the scriptures. Come on, let's be honest. There are no, in the Holy Bible, for instance, there are no chapters that were written by women. There are some written about women, but there are none who had authors as women. So every standard that has been created about how we move in the world has been framed by men, and so that's the reality, and it goes back to that women were seen as vulnerable and not able to protect ourselves, and we needed male protection, and so we became their property to trade from father to husband, kind of thing. That was just the way that society's operated. Now, we stopped doing that sort of monetary transaction for the most part, but the feeling, the expectation didn't stop. Men expected to be in charge. Men expected to be the breadwinners. Men expected to be the person making the decisions. I mean,
well, why lose that if that's going to be helpful to
well,
them?
it's about power, and it's about being in control, right? And so, I mean, in my lifetime, women didn't have the option to have their own bank account or their own credit card until the 70s. We couldn't buy anything without a male signature, co-signer, father, husband, brother. We couldn't do that. We didn't have our own financial identity, and so that whole tradition has been part of what we've been trying to change the culture of. That's why women want equality. I want to be seen as my own
person
capable,
right.
Responsible for the choices I make. And so, these different international documents that have been created through the United Nations, mostly in 1985, the first time that I remember from my lifetime that they had discussions about women and equality through the UN, created a document called CEDAW, which was the Council for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. That was the first time then the countries of the UN decided that they would start to work towards ending discrimination against women. And so in 1985, that CEDAW was passed as a UN document, and then countries co-signed on it to say, yes, we're going to work on eliminating discrimination against women. We're going to do that. The United States did not. It had to go through our Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That's how you get international documents agreed to and assigned. Jesse Helms was a senator from North Carolina, very conservative man, refused to even bring it into
he would not support CEDAW.
He wouldn't even bring it up for a vote in his.
And this was in what year? 1980?
It was in the 80s. Yes.
Okay.
So and people to this day, women's organizations are still trying to get CEDAW ratified in the U.S.
Now, where was President? I think President Biden was the one that was supportive of the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, correct?
Then Senator Joseph Biden.
Oh, at Senator, yes, at that time.
Yes.
You were working. You
in
were
the early
working with him?
90s. Yes.
Okay.
I was the director of the National Coalition at the time, and we worked with then Senator Biden.
Senator.
Yes. With a number of other national organizations to draft and help pass the Violence Against Women Act, which was passed in 1994. It was passed as part of the crime bill that year when Clinton signed it, but Biden was the chief architect of that, and has been a 30-year champion for that. So throughout his Senate career, it was passed and then reauthorized a number of different times. The Violence Against Women Act was, and then as vice president, he expanded on that by creating the Office on Violence Against Women within the White House, the first ever that was created under his office of vice president. And then as president, he has continued to expand that and support VAWA, and in his budget has increased the funding for it every year as president. So yes, Joe Biden has been probably, in my mind, the premier political champion on these issues. And I doubt anyone will surpass him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think he was so helpful? What was the reason he got involved?
He can articulate what that is, but I think he just started listening to the women around him in his life. I think Dr. Joe Biden was teaching in colleges and universities most of their time together, right? And she would have stories about women. We as advocates spent a lot of time on the Hill educating Congress, and senators and representatives about the impact of violence back home, trying to get better legislation, trying to get funding. And so he was someone who listened, who began to learn, was willing to help use his power to make a difference. And that's why it's important for us as we connect with people that we care about to carry those stories forward, to say, there's something you can do to impact this. There's something you can do to make a difference here. And Joe Biden was one of those people who didn't just say, yeah, okay, and vote. He put his weight behind it. He put his weight behind it in ways that, only a senator can. It was phenomenal.
So I'm going to shift to today now and the work that we have and that we're working on, but also really the violence that's in our country today and in our globe. And I'm going to have to read a quote here, but violence is not just a female challenge. In fact, according to the American Public Health Association, they wrote this in 2018 for the pandemic, that violence is a public health crisis. National data demonstrates that recently it's increased in violent events, okay? In addition, there is increasing evidence of the profoundly harmful effects of violence on child development, which is what you actually were talking about, Rita, because of your own understanding. The long-term health of affected populations and the economic development, the long-term health of affected, I just said that, development of the entire community, especially communities of color.
Mm-hmm.
The current fragmented approach that leans heavily on the justice system needs to be updated to an integrated one that supports extensive cross-sectoral collaboration with an emphasis on health. This will allow all agencies to be involved and held accountable for preventing violence and its health effects. In this approach, health departments, hospitals, schools, universities, nonprofits, and justice systems share the data on all forms of violence and can identify protocols for screenings and develop and enhance programs and policies to prevent and reduce violence. Now I'm going to jump. Every day in our nation, an average of 39 people are killed and 117 people die by suicide. 180 more people are shot and wounded, and 27,400 are hurt by a partner or significant other. And here's what this gets to me. 8,640 children are abused and neglected by the hands of someone they trust. In the United States of America.
And that's every day.
That's every day. They go on to break this down further. And if you want to access this article, go to November 13th, 2018 from the American Public Health Association. So here's my question. What do you think needs to happen in America before people are going to pay attention and recognize that our public safety crisis is no longer something to be ignored, but is now really a critical infrastructure challenge that is similar to the potholes in our streets, the bridges that need to be addressed, And we need to invest this as much as the bipartisan infrastructure bill that we just invested in. What do you think that needs to happen?
Well, I think, making that comparison, Melissa, you're talking about strong foundations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Strong foundations are what make us safer. So whether it's a safe bridge or a safe road, a safe rail line, human beings need that strong foundation too, in order to be able to function, to appropriately take responsibility and take care of ourselves. We need the foundational support, which is what feeling safe gives us. Is I can walk out my door and not be anxious that I can't get to my car before I'm going to be hurt. And so if you don't have that strong foundational sense of safety, then everything is impacted by that. Where you go, when you go, who you go with, and how much money you can make, because overnight shifts generally pay more, but women don't want to take them because it's not safe being out at night alone, going to and from work. And so it is about the infrastructure of the human being. It's about shoring up and stabilizing the infrastructure of the human being. Because if human beings live in trauma, if they have violence as an experience, it will impact their long-term health. Chronic health issues develop because people live in trauma and violence. And those impacts can be mitigated if we understand that and if we get help to people. So kids who witness violence, if we get them resources and information and help them understand what that experience was, then they have a better chance of not developing those long-term chronic health issues like diabetes and heart disease and high blood pressure and asthma. And those are the things that happen if you look at the ACEs study. The Adverse Childhood Experience study. It's very clear that if we don't address trauma for people, long-term chronic health issues develop, and that's an economic issue. It becomes more costly to deal with people who have diabetes. It becomes more costly to deal with people who have asthma and can't breathe it. So there's this ripple effect for having a fractured infrastructure of the human that all of us pay for. All of us pay for that in some variety of ways. And it's in our best interest to reduce the violence, right? To not normalize it, to not excuse it, to not minimize it. It's not acceptable to behave this way. You don't treat people this way. You don't hurt people just because you're frustrated or sad or disappointed or whatever it is that's driving you. It's not an acceptable outcome. You find another strategy because it just really erodes the foundation of who we are as people and as a community. And that then makes it bad for everybody. Everybody has that impact, whether you're living in that house you hear the screaming from or not. It's impacting you because it comes to the streets and it starts to create violence in the community, not just in that home.
So to sum up what you just said, you agree that we need to address the public health crisis. It does begin with the individual, and that investing in it is a total community solution. We all need to focus on it. But I think my question is, what do you think it will take for us to recognize that it's something that is not a reactive situation, but that it is something that typically we are a preventative society, or we're a reactive society, and we're not very good at looking at preventative measures, right, on these types of conversations until it's already too late, right? So my question is, what do you think it's going to take for us to pay attention to this? What is that going to be? Like you were called in with the Ray Rice situation, right? Oh, now all of a sudden it's here, right? So what do you think it may take? That's my question.
Well, it's hard to know at this point because I think we have plenty of data. to tell us we should be acting.
I just read a bunch of data to you.
We have the information about if you don't want this to continue, we can do something. We just need to collectively do something. We need to collectively set a different standard. And it is in your best interest, whether you think it is or not. It is in your best interest, whether you had a child at Sandy Hook or not. That trauma should matter to us, and we should want to do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again. It doesn't have to be just about us. It should be about our humanity and care for each other. And we have the tools, we have the technology now, we have the options, we have the resources, we can implement them together. We can, and we can do it at a variety of levels of engagement. We can do it with making a one-time donation somewhere, to taking a 40-hour training course to become a volunteer advocate. There's a variety of ways that we can engage, but engaging is what will make the difference. And it should matter that we take that step, because you can't just complain about not liking the way the world is. What are you doing to make it different? What are you doing to change the course within your family, within your community, within your faith community, at your place of work? There are all kinds of opportunities for us to engage and make a difference. Tools that we have now available, like eBodyGuard technology, that can make a difference, that can make people feel safer. It's just about implementing it.
So I'm going to move to those questions now. So what started your journey here at eBodyGuard, and why are you here working with us at eBodyGuard?
Well, I am one of those people who believes that the education that was entrusted in me by survivors and children deserve to be shared. It's critical information, and it can help everybody. And it's to honor those people who trusted me. So I try to share that in a way that's helpful to moving our humanity forward. And you contacted me a number of years ago to ask me for help with part of the technology you were developing, the safety app. And so I started reviewing what it was doing, what it could do, how it could be helpful. You were incredibly flexible in listening to what I was suggesting, and made changes that I think were really critical to making it a better technology for victims. And the more I learned about it, the more I understood what you wanted to do and what you could do with this technology, the more invested I was in trying to help make it become a universal use application, because it will improve the safety not just of victims, but I think law enforcement responding to domestic violence calls. I think the more information that they have, the safer they're going to be in a very unpredictable and dangerous situation. And so it's not just the person on the other side of the door who's in danger, it's the one who's coming to help. And that will improve their safety as well. And when I understood that, it was like, okay, I'm in. I'll help you however I can, because I want everybody to walk out of that situation alive. Everybody to walk out of it alive, and to get a chance to help change the trajectory of that situation. And if we get the information to people who are responding sooner than they have now, that trajectory can be changed much more often than we're achieving now, which is not well.
Yeah. So in the case of this technology, and maybe one of the survivors that you're thinking of, why do you think that eBodyGuard's going to help in the future? To keep someone safe wherever they are. Like give me an example so that the world understands specifically what a use case can help someone now moving forward, whether it's Gabby Petito, Nicole Brown Simpson. What do you think the difference will be?
Well, I think that just using the most recent Gabby Petito case, where the law enforcement response to that call may have been very different had they had background information about what had happened in that relationship prior to people witnessing what was happening on that highway and called law enforcement to respond. So what they had was just that moment in time where they heard his story, they heard her story, and they believed his. Had they had background information from her that would have been stored in the safety app and had been shared through dispatch to the law enforcement, they might have been able to make a better assessment of what was happening there. She may not have died because she did. Because of the way they responded to her, they identified her as the perpetrator, which removed her from the access to the domestic violence program near her. Because they identified her as the abuser, she couldn't get into shelter then. And so she was left much more vulnerable, and he was left much more empowered. And he used that power to end her life. And so if the technology had been available that she had used and had given them a better background about what was really happening in that relationship, it might have, the outcome might have been very different, and we might have been able to help both of them.
So I'm going to walk it through. Okay. Gabby would have taken the eBodyGuard application. She would have filled out the eBodyGuard safety profile. She would have been able to literally place her boyfriend at the time into the "sometimes I'm afraid of" screen that you and I talked through when I contacted you. She would have had his photo in there. She would have said, "I am afraid of him." That would have come through 911. 911 would have provided that information over to the Utah police, right? And then they would have had a whole lot more details on that call because we're integrated across America 911. And then they would have been able to ask more salient details on that call. Unfortunately, because that didn't occur, we don't know at this time if that opportunity was there. We know that that opportunity wasn't there for Gabby. But moving forward, eBodyGuard is able to do that for as many people as possible. In Wisconsin, just a few months ago, we know that that was able to save someone's life.
Yeah, that's the goal. You have to intercede in a way that gives you a chance to make a difference later.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And giving, and what we talked through before, is that giving victims and survivors the power to be able to know that they can at least place this on their phone and then capture the evidence that they need so that they can empower themselves for when they're ready, Because what we talked through is that it's very dangerous to move forward.
And it's dangerous to call for help.
Call for help and then leave when it's up to them. So I want to thank you for the time that you have shared with us, for your journey, for all the things that you've taught us. The evidence capture that we often don't have because these are so difficult to be able to capture this type of evidence with a he said, she said. And when you're saying, they show up on scene, they listen to the calm voice of the perpetrator or the primary aggressor, right? And then typically the PTSD environment of the person that's being abused does not have the capability to provide a linear logical story, right?
Right.
So the eBodyGuard application provides the capability to provide the pre-call data and to provide the capability to be the voice. And Rita, that's why you're engaged at eBodyGuard. And I appreciate that you're doing this work with us. But I also appreciate that you've stood in the line in the gap for 43 years. Thanks. It's a long time.
It is a long time.
Is there anything else that you want to share with people about why you do this work, why you've done this work? What else do you want to say?
Well, what I would share with people is that what I have come to know is that survivors are the strongest, most creative, most courageous people I've ever met. To be able to continue to function in the face of someone's absolute focus on making you fail, and to do that sometimes in a way that harms you. It is something you should not think of victims of domestic violence as weak. They are not. They are resilient and smart and creative. And I am forever grateful that that I know so many, and that I've been given the gift of sharing the information that they were willing to share with me, because they deserve every respect and support we can give them.
You're a true hero.
Thank
You really are. And from a survivor myself, who has walked through the journey of going from victim to victor to now visionary, I want to applaud you for standing in the gap for so many years. Thank you for the work you've done, for holding the voice for so many people. You're amazing, Rita Smith. You're amazing. Thank you for being here today with me, and for teaching so many of us, and for sharing this with the world.
Thanks, Melissa.